hadvash, honey, vayayin, and wine, raw liktanim. It's something which is not good for young children. Honey is not good for young children, and wine is not good for young children. It's interesting. It's a known fact that unless a child is minimally 2 years old, you should not give a child honey. Why? Because the enzymes that a person needs to break down honey, a child till 2 are not fully developed, and it actually could cause damage to the liver of a child that's less than 2 years old. Okay? So the Rambam is writing, honey and wine is unhealthy for a child. And here he's not differentiating how young the child is. As long as it's a child, what you consider a child, the yovelis is payment. For an older person, something which is very beneficial. Honey, we had earlier, remember? An older person who's constipated, in the morning should drink water with a lot of honey diluted in the water, because that will soften the bowel. And wine also is very good for an older person. The koshkim mosek shomim, and definitely in the wintertime, where the body needs that inner warmth. The tzorch odem lechol mosachama shnei shlishim. Masha ochel b'mosek shomim. In the summer, whenever you eat, the Rambam writes, you should always eat a third less than your full capacity. In the summertime, where you have the climate oppressive, you should eat 2/3 of the 2/3 that you eat in the winter. Get this. In the winter, you should always eat a third less than your full capacity. And that's when it's cold. And in the summer, where the heat actually causes the body to be in a more active mode because of the heat issue, you should eat 2/3 of what you eat in the winter. Okay? Lola yishtadol odom she'meyav yurofin kol yomov. Yekorav l'shilshul mat. We said this yesterday. You down 14. Od klal acher omru brisaguf. Something which has relevance to maintain a healthy body. Kozmach odom misamel v'yogea harbe. A person always misamel, mean he's physically active to a great degree, where it actually brings about a level of toil. It's considered toil, and he gets worn down because of it. That's the degree of activity. Venu savea, and he doesn't eat to a sated point. Eats less than being full. Umeyav rofin, and he always has a soft bowel. And choli ba'olav v'kochum mischazik. He'll be immune from illness, and his strength will only increase. It will not diminish as he gets older. This person, even if he eats foods which are not that healthy, he will remain healthy, despite eating unhealthy food. A person who exercises, let's say a person does physical exercise, and he doesn't eat to his full capacity, and he has not diarrhea, but meaning he's no relevance to constipation. Even if you eat foods which are not that healthy, he will not be susceptible to illness, and his strength will not wane. He says, a person he stays in one place and he doesn't in any way exert himself. There's no exertion in his life, physical exertion. The person withholds his bowel movement, his bodily function. Person who has a hot stool, he has relevance to constipation. That person, even if he eats healthy food, and he lived healthily, eating wise, drinking wise, Kol yomav yimachovim v'kocho toshash. His whole life will be suffering with pains or ailments, and his strength will weaken, will start waning. Meaning exercise, movement is crucial for your physical health. Movement to the point that actually you're toiling. It's at a point of toiling. So this concept of exercise today, that we don't live in a culture where our livelihood entails physical involvement. You have to take out time to do those exertions to the body. Now it's interesting. They once had a write-up. People years ago, they lived in tenements. When people lived in tenements, there was no elevator in the building. So if a person had to go to his apartment, sometimes at times he would have to go up 4 or 5 times a day, 5 flights of steps. And the wife, when she washed the laundry, she had a scrub board, and physically she had to scrub the clothing. And if she had carpet, she'd have to beat the carpet. Everything was physical. And you had to bake bread, you had to knead it with your hands. So every aspect of the life had to do with physical exertion. That's crucial and key in terms of a person's health. In addition, he says to have a soft bowel and to eat healthy. Okay? And your strength will increase. See, in the olden days, people didn't know, they believed that eating red meat, fatty meat was healthy. Very often people at the age of 45 would die of a heart attack, and they didn't understand because they ate a very high-fat diet, which their arteries were clogged, and people did not make it to even midlife. They passed away. Besides, there was no antibiotics, so people contracted pneumonia, they would die of pneumonia. And many other things they would die of. But you realize, in the Middle East, Sephardic Jews, many of them, they eat very little meat. And we want to call it the Mediterranean diet, many of them. And because of that, they were slimmer. They didn't gouge themselves with meat. The person eats to a point where he overeats. Gluttonous eating. Overeating to every human being who it's like taking poison. You're destroying your health, destroying life. And overeating is the primary reason why a person is susceptible for every illness that wears down the immune system. Overeating. Today they speak about, you have a plane that flies over an extended period of time. It's called metal fatigue. What's metal fatigue? The metal originally has a certain intensity and endurance, but being exposed to elements over an extended period of time, its durability is actually weakened. And literally the metal, although it looks the same, it doesn't have that same durability to the wear and tear any longer. Although visually there's no indication of that. The human body, if you overwork it, they used to say years ago that a president, which the term was 4 years, would age 20 years in that 4-year period. Because he'd have to burn the candle at both ends, and also the level of responsibility. If he was really a person who lived up to his responsibilities, the responsibilities were overwhelming. So to live with this level of intensity, responsibility for 4 years, it was equivalent to living 20 years. and he would age. In 4 years, he aged 20 years. But that's called overdoing it. We're not saying you should be. Sometimes you have no choice. The Gemara tells us that Yosef, who was the monarch in Egypt, he was the viceroy of Egypt, he took full responsibility. And he was the youngest from the youngest of the tribes. And yet he was the first one to pass away from all the tribes. Why? Because since he assumed that level of responsibility, that's why he died earlier than his brothers. So to be in a position, sometimes you have no choice. If you're the only one who could fill that position, so you have no choice. But factually, it has its consequences. You paid a price. A person wants to earn a big salary, and you have to become the head of General Motors. As much as that salary is attractive, you realize the everything has a cost factor. Your family is going to suffer that cost factor. Your health is going to suffer that cost factor, because everything has its consequences. And that's it. So he says a person who's sedentary, doesn't exercise, doesn't do all these things, and especially if he eats gluttonously, it's the beginning of the end. Every illness, he's going to be susceptible to all illnesses. He says, the majority of illnesses which come upon a person, either because they eat unhealthy food, or because you fill your stomach and you eat to your fullest. I feel even if you're eating healthy food. This is what King Solomon said with his great wisdom. Show me a piv ulishono, one who watches his mouth and his tongue. Show me mitzaras nafsho. He's being protected from ailments to his body, to his klomar. Show me piv ulechel machlora. A person is careful not to eat unhealthy foods. Obelizboach, or to say to yourself, ulishono mulidaber elatrochav, and you only speak what you should speak, not other things. So if your physicality is in check and your tongue is in check, and you don't speak idly foolishness, and that's living fully responsible, then you're ahead of the game. Otherwise, you're going to be compromised. You know, it's interesting. Shabbos is a custom in the Orthodox. When the Orthodox, after services on Shabbos, we have a kiddush. And what is a kiddush? In the old days, what was a kiddush? When I grew up, you had a few pieces of herring, you had a bottle of whiskey, and you had some sugar kickle. That was the kiddush. People afterwards would say kiddush. It took 5 minutes, and they're on the way home. So when they left, they weren't able to fill themselves up. So 2 things: it's healthier. Secondly, your wife prepares a meal at home. It's a total disrespect if you fill yourself at shul, and when you get home, you have no appetite to eat the food. But what do people do? Today we have elaborate kiddushim. It's like going to a smorgasbord almost, and you fill yourself up with all the delicacies, and somebody's taking a second portion. You get home, your wife has a 4-course meal waiting for you, and she prepared especially for Shabbos. You can't insult your wife. So what do? As we say, you dig in and you eat again. When that person finishes eating, how does he feel? He enjoyed the food, which is hard to believe how you can enjoy it after being full, but he enjoyed it. But when he walks away from that table, his stomach hurts him, or he has to open his belt. That's a fact. You ask any of these people, they experience this every Shabbos when they finish the lunchtime meal, second meal. The Rambam says all illnesses stem from overeating, from this glut. illness eating, every illness, even if you eat healthy food, doesn't make a difference. But unfortunately, it's just people are creatures of habit. They do it every week in and week out. People, after davening, somebody says it's Dvar Torah, and they serve a kiddush. I don't take not a morsel of food from that kiddush. People said, why not? I said, my wife prepares Shabbos. It's a total disrespect. How do we now then go home and not eat the food with an appetite? It's the wrong thing. Besides, the food there is what they serve is not that healthy. Besides.